Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Carlos Moncada, Director of Client Services at InfoReady. We appreciate you taking the time for joining us for today's Peer Spotlight webinar featuring our guest panelist from UC San Diego, Lindsey Fitzpatrick, who is the Program Officer for Strategic Research Opportunities in the Office of Research Affairs. So Lindsey will be covering the life cycle of limited submissions processes and how that looks at UC San Diego. So this is going to include a broad range of topics, including the tools used for the full life cycle, and also all the way to putting together review committees. So quite a few topics. I know there's always a lot of questions about limited submissions, so and we had a lot of questions upon registration, so I'm sure this will be an active Q&A session today. So before getting started, just wanted to discuss the schedule and the logistics a little bit. So we had the webinar today is 60 minutes. We don't want to keep you any longer than an hour. And Lindsey's going to present for about 20 minutes. The remaining time will be for Q&A. Other things to note are that all the phones are muted. So if you do have questions, please submit those in the question chat box in the webinar software. And then we'll get that, and we'll do a proctored Q&A here. And you'll get to keep hearing my beautiful voice during that time. Also, please keep in mind that the webinar is being recorded, and it will be available a couple different ways. There'll be an unedited version within the next day or so, sent to you via email, and we'll also post an edited version of the webinar sometime next week on our website. And then if you wanted to follow along with the slides or share them with colleagues, we've actually put that in the handout section, so feel free to download that. And the last item is that there's a post-webinar survey with a few questions. It's really quick, so if anyone could take the time, any of you could take the time to fill out that survey, that would be great. So now that we've covered the logistics, I'll turn things over to our panelist from UC San Diego, Lindsey Fitzpatrick. Lindsey, take it away.
Thanks, Carlos. I'm always happy to have the opportunity to talk about our limited submission process because I've picked up so many great tips from colleagues over the past couple of years, and I'm hopeful that I will get some more ideas out of today's discussion. First slide. I thought I'd talk quickly about 6 aspects of our process at a high level, a bit of background on our institution, how our process looks from a bird's eye view, some of the tools we use, how we structure our internal review, the goals and challenges that we're working on right now, and then some of the resources that I turn to. After that, I'd be happy to go into further detail on any aspect. Next slide. I wanted to start with a really quick overview. As Carlos mentioned, my name is Lindsey Fitzpatrick. I'm part of our central research development team on campus. We are a 3-person team, and I have 2 colleagues who focus on major proposal development. We report to the Senior Associate Vice Chancellor for Research and indirectly to our Vice Chancellor for Research. We also have a colleague in another team who supports limited submissions part-time. Next, I wanted to just do a quick overview on our research portfolio. Next slide. We're a large research-intensive public university. We're one of 10 campuses in the University of California system with close to 3,000 PIs on campus across more than 50 departments in 11 divisions and schools. We have the largest school of engineering on the West Coast, and our largest sources of federal funding come from HHS, National Science Foundation, Department of Defense, and NOAA. Next slide. Our office provides central coordination for limited submissions across campus. These are any opportunities when the sponsor establishes an institutional limit on the number of applications that can be submitted from a single campus. In our case, this often includes affiliated institutions, our Scripps Institution of Oceanography, our general campus, and our health sciences schools. We coordinate opportunities for faculty, researchers, and more recently, postdocs. But we do not manage any opportunities that are limited either at the PI or the departmental levels, so limits on the number of applications an individual PI could submit. We also don't handle opportunities that primarily address graduate students or clinical fellows, which are handled by other offices. Overall, limited submissions are an important piece of our overall research strategy. Last year, we handled just over 150 opportunities from nearly 60 sponsoring agencies, and collectively, these opportunities offered significant funding for campus. Next slide. Although we do provide central coordination for the process, we do have a distributed research development network on campus, and we work collaboratively with a number of partner offices. Most closely, we work with our Office of Foundation Relations. On our campus, this office is located within advancement, but we do work very closely, everything from initial invitations for limited submissions to coordinating information sessions, and following internal selection, we typically refer applicants to specific officers to develop their full proposals. We also work with our Contracts and Grants Office, which serves as the authorized institutional representative for submissions, and our Office of Academic Affairs, which holds formal authority for faculty awards. So for the past few years, we have coordinated select awards, such as the Blavatnik National Awards and Carnegie Fellows, through our limited submission process. However, these programs do fall under the auspices of a separate office. Depending on sponsor, we also work with colleagues in our corporate relations programs and specific areas of campus, in particular our Cancer Institute. Next slide. In terms of timeline, our overall process can run as short as 2 weeks, but our primary goal is really to allow as much time as possible for full proposal development. And we typically target, from the time we notify internal applicants of their selection, we typically aim to provide a minimum of 2 months for full proposal development prior to the sponsor's timeline. When a new solicitation is identified, it usually takes us anywhere from a day or so to a week to complete internal coordination. So that might be things like scheduling information sessions or planning competitions or liaising on process. We then try to leave internal calls open for a minimum of 2 weeks. And once an internal competition closes, all competitive programs are discussed at an in-person meeting for one of our review committees. And that usually happens 1 to 2 weeks after the deadline. And then we try to notify applicants as soon as possible after that committee meeting takes place, typically providing feedback to applicants within a week or so after the committee meeting. Next slide. We transitioned our limited submission management to InfoReady in fall of 2017. And we use InfoReady for a number of other competitions on campus, including travel grants, conference abstracts, seed funding, student fellowships, et cetera. But we find that it really, in particular, integrates across our limited submission process. I'll talk in a minute about identifying opportunities, but we do use Pivot heavily for the discovery process. We're currently using Asana for project management, email for distribution of opportunities, including internal mailman listservs. We're in the process of developing a SharePoint site to house internal resources for applicants. So for example, internal guidance documents that have been developed based on committee feedback over the years. And then all our tracking is currently in Excel. Next slide. In terms of identifying opportunities, this is definitely one of the core challenges. We rely on a number of different sources to identify limited submissions. In particular, we have been expanding our institutional records and now have fairly comprehensive records for the past 5 to 10 years of opportunities. So we're able to populate a large part of our calendar, kind of the tent poles, based on prior year records. We also rely on an institutional subscription to Pivot, the online funding database, where we have alerts set up for any new opportunities that they post that are identified as limited submissions. I also have subscriptions to various sponsor email updates, including NSF and NIH, where both call out limited submission opportunities. We receive invitations through our foundation relations team. PIs alert us to individual postings, and then we also occasionally pick up opportunities from peer institutions as well. Next slide. As soon as we identify an opportunity, every new opportunity will receive an individual task card within Asana. We have two standard task setups or templates in Asana, depending on whether it's a single or dual stage competition, and each has a standard workflow. We also have custom fields set up to grab key pieces of information at a glance, so including quick links to the info-ready competition and the sponsor's URL, the limit on number of submissions, and the sponsor's deadline. I probably should take a minute here to thank both Carlos and our colleagues at the University of Arizona. We had actually previously been using another project management tool, but switched to Asana after seeing this in a prior webinar, and it has really standardized and improved our own workflow. Next slide. This is a rolled up view of our Asana dashboard where we can see at a glance everything that's currently live on InfoReady, as well as competitions that are in active review and our upcoming launch calendar. As soon as an individual opportunity completes the internal life cycle, if it's either a known recurrent competition or if the solicitation has future deadlines, we've likely noted it in the task card, and it's then cloned to our FY21 pipeline to pre-populate for the next year. In our dashboard view, we also have opportunities tagged and color-coded by one of the 4 standing review committees that they'll be tracked to, as well as a status tag for the particular opportunity. So whether it's an internal expression of interest, if it has already been converted from an LOI in InfoReady to a full competition, we might tag it as watching if a sponsor hasn't released a current deadline, or OUF, which is our code for open until filled, meaning opportunities that are now first come, first serve. Next slide. So because we use standing review committees on campus, to the extent possible, we schedule ad hoc meetings for these committees, but we do try to align deadlines and maximize agendas when committees do meet. So we use the timeline feature in Asana. Often we have already pre-planned meetings for different committees based on known opportunities. So when new opportunities come in, we'll look at the timeline feature and try to align to the extent possible with pre-planned meetings for those committees. Next slide. All our competitions are posted to our InfoReady limited submission site. We have, in addition, 2 campus mailman-based listservs. These are opt-in listservs that we use to distribute opportunities that may be of general interest on campus. And then we have a second list that's dedicated to biomedical, clinical, and translational opportunities. Those lists are opt-in, and they do include all department chairs on campus, as well as departmental administrative officers for additional targeted distribution. Next slide. Like in Asana, in InfoReady, we have 2 standard templates that we use for creating almost all new competitions. We found this particularly helpful because it allows us to make tweaks on an ongoing basis and then immediately propagate any changes into all new competitions. We have a standard letter of intent template, and this is used in cases either when an opportunity historically hasn't been competitive or timing otherwise allows. We'll typically start by requesting just a simple paragraph, and the purpose of this is simply to gauge campus interest. For our full competition template, those typically vary between a 1 to 3 page project description, along with either a CV, NSF, or NIH bio sketch, depending on the competition, and then any additional elements that might be specific to different competitions. Next slide. For all competitive competitions, our review process operates on a number of core principles. The most important of these is that all competitive programs are reviewed on our campus by standing independent faculty committees. The committees conduct evaluation based on the sponsor's stated criteria, and all applications receive consensus committee feedback. All aspects of our internal review process are confidential, with the exception of the committee membership, which is published. So we don't comment on the number of applications received for a specific opportunity or the names of departments of the selected nominees. Next slide. All our competitive reviews are conducted by one of 4 standing committees. Each of our committees is chaired by a senior faculty member, and appointments are made to the committees for 1-year terms, which are renewed on a rolling basis. Members are appointed by our Academic Senate Committee on Committees, and we currently have about 35 senior faculty serving across 4 broad discipline-based committees. Each of our committees has between 6 and 10 members, and the individual committees meet up to maybe the max is about 8 times per year. So we currently have committees that focus on all science and engineering opportunities. So that committee reviews many of the NSF programs. We have both an early career and a general biomedical committee. And then we have a committee that focuses on all opportunities in the arts, humanities, social sciences, and applied professions. Next slide. By the time a particular competition closes, we will conduct a quick internal eligibility review on all applications received. And if a competition requires review, often by this point, we already have the review meeting scheduled if it's needed. So as soon as the competition closes, each member of the review committee that's going to be assigned to the opportunity will receive a request to review all applications. So all members of a committee review all applications for that particular opportunity. We then typically ask reviewers to either bin or tier applications into one of 3 tiers. Tier 1 being highly competitive applications, 2 requiring discussion, and Tier 3 potentially being less competitive in a given cycle. Preliminary reviews will be due online via InfoReady 1 to 2 days prior to the in-person meeting. And we then use the InfoReady export feature to create a ranking table that informs the initial in-person discussion. The committee then meets as a group in person to discuss all the applications and develop consensus feedback to the applicants. Next slide. Previous slide. Oh, okay, next slide. For our tracking, we're currently using Excel with pivot tables, but we're actually in the process of finalizing a setup in Airtable that will include Zapier integrations with Asana to automate some of the individual steps within our workflow. Some of the information that we're tracking right now, our primary interest is in whether individual competitions are historically competitive so that we can better project review needs. So we track how many applications we receive, we track the internal deadline and outcomes, and we also track special handling for specific competitions. So either how letters of nomination are handled or additional materials that we request for specific cycles. Next slide. So I just wanted to talk quickly about some of the goals and challenges that we're working on right now. From a very high level, obviously our primary goal is submitting or selecting the most competitive applications from campus for an individual opportunity. But within that context, one of our primary goals is really maximizing opportunity for campus, meaning posting as many competitions as we identify, while also trying to streamline the administrative requirements. So really, we try to give a lot of thought to balancing what we request from applicants in an individual competition so that we have the materials that the committee will need to make a scientifically credible decision, while also streamlining whatever we're requesting from internal PIs, knowing that they may not have the opportunity to move forward for a full proposal. We're also continually adjusting our process and making changes, particularly through our InfoReady templates. Most recently, we made adjustments to the automated notifications that PIs receive on submitting an application, so trying to provide a better sense of the timeline for notification. We also recently added a applicant acknowledgement to all our competitive templates, where when submitting an application, applicants are required to acknowledge that many internal submissions are competitive, and that if selected, they will be expected to move forward with full proposal development. And if anything changes, they should then notify our office in time for another PI to develop a competitive proposal. If this does not happen, it may be taken into account in future internal review cycles. We're also working to really try to enhance integrations, both in the tools and systems we use to streamline the workflow, with partner offices for better coordination and scheduling, and with our major proposal development teams, so that applicants selected for specific high-value opportunities are seamlessly referred for additional support. This all in the context of some of the common challenges that we're probably all facing right now. Opportunity identification when they're not specifically, opportunities aren't specifically flagged as limited submissions, and it appears on page 17 of the solicitation. Awareness on a highly distributed campus, trying to make sure that PIs who are interested in specific opportunities are aware of the internal process. Review our bandwidth. Timelines in general, particularly at this time of year with our campus closing for holidays, makes it difficult to coordinate. And then the overall growth and opportunities over the past 5 years or so. Final slide. So I just wanted to close by talking about a couple of the resources that I turn to for questions and managing our limited submission process. Recently, one of my colleagues developed an internal network for research development resources that are based across campus. This has been particularly helpful, particularly with different types of InfoReady competitions. It allows us to tap internal expertise and look at new templates that are being developed. Because we are one of 10 campuses within the University of California system, we do also have a multi-institution Listserv that offers additional resources. And then finally, both the NORDIP Listserv and the limited submission community of practice that's currently managed as a Google group provide additional resources for limited submission questions. Those were the primary things that I wanted to cover, and I'm happy to talk about questions if there are any specific areas of interest.
Thanks, Lindsey, for sharing all that great information about limited submissions. So Lindsey's contact details are displayed on screen, but we've also received a few questions upon registration and here during the webinar. So let's dive into Q&A. One question we have asked about something you briefly touched on, and so the question is, what is the process when a faculty member finds a funding opportunity that you aren't currently advertising?
So right now we have a note on our limited submission microsite in InfoReady, as well as our own departmental website, inviting PIs to reach out to us. As we make the transition, one of the next changes we're going to be making is I have a form set up in Asana that will allow PIs to submit through an online form, which will then automatically create a task within Asana for us to move forward in addressing it. It typically depends on the time, the response typically depends on the timeline when we learn about the opportunity. So there are, of course, cases where we're notified by either PIs or our Office of Contracts and Grants within a few days of the sponsor deadline, which at that point, opportunities are typically first come, first serve if we're not aware of other interest on campus. Otherwise, when we're notified about new opportunities, we will then post competitions and open internal calls to coordinate interest.
Thank you. So here is a question related to the partnerships you mentioned. What is the specific role of foundation relations vis-a-vis your office through the entire limited submission opportunity lifecycle?
So I would say that the only aspect they don't directly participate in is the in-person committee review, which is typically closed to our faculty committee membership. I talk multiple times a week with our Office of Foundation Relations. They often receive invitations directly from sponsors for submission, so we'll pass on RFPs and any details. I often, for one of the steps within our Asana workflow for any new opportunity, I think step number 1 is consulting foundation relations. And I often do that for specific opportunities to try to get a better sense of sponsor priorities in case they've recently met with foundation program officers for that opportunity. We have recently been piloting a new model on campus where our Office of Foundation Relations is organizing quarterly, essentially open office hours or workshops for all limited submission opportunities that are going to come up in a given quarter. And the idea there is even when competitions may not have been formally opened on InfoReady, it's to give applicants advance notice and time to prepare applications. So we held a workshop on campus in October and we'll be holding another one in January. When applicants have been selected for individual opportunities, Foundation Relations is then copied on the notice to applicants, and applicants are often referred offline, and I'll connect them directly to the cognizant Foundation Relations officer for any support or questions in developing the full application.
Thanks, Lindsey. I've got a couple questions about the reviewers, so here we go. Number 1, are faculty reviewers compensated at all?
With the reward of internal service, I would say. We don't provide monetary compensation, but because appointments are made through our academic senate, they are hopefully recognized in internal promotion and tenure reviews as part of university service. On a more practical level, we often provide lunches when the committees meet in person.
Thank you. So I've heard related to that. I've also heard that other institutions hold like annual appreciation lunches. So this is a question for me. Does UC San Diego do that?
I have done it in the past with other committees. End of year often tends to be a bit hectic, but what we have done alternatively is hold welcome lunches when new members are joining the committee. So we organized a combined orientation, welcome, appreciation lunch that was hosted by our Senior Associate Vice Chancellor at the start of the year. And then, of course, we do provide acknowledgement and thank yous at the end of the year to all serving members, and particularly members rotating off committees.
Thanks. And so actually your last sentence there relates to one of these other questions. And it's related to how exactly are new faculty members appointed. You mentioned something about faculty senate appointing them, but what's the process like?
Yeah, so our academic senate has a standing committee on committees for appointments to all campus committees. So typically around, well, in the early spring, we'll poll all continuing members and identify any new appointments that might be needed on the 4 committees. Our Vice Chancellor will then submit a formal request to the Academic Senate requesting new appointments, the number of new appointments that we need. The Academic Senate then identifies and confirms members for the various committees, and then will provide us with a formal response on all new appointments. From that point, I reach out individually to all the new members who will be rotating on, and provide them some background on committee principles and practices, and then follow up with a specific introduction to InfoReady and create their account there as new reviewers. We then hold an orientation to inform the new reviewers about the overall importance of limited submissions to the campus research mission, as well as introduce them to chairs, to the kind of some of the sensitivities that come up on the different committees, and then the actual mechanics of the review process. It's kind of an ongoing onboarding process.
So related to that, how many members for each of the review committees? That's another question we had.
It varies a bit. Our Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences Committee does often meet less frequently. I believe there are 6 standing members on that committee. Our biomedical committees are typically a bit larger. Those are around between 10 and 12 on the different committees.
Thank you. And one last question we have about review committees. Quote, are members of review committees eliminated from being eligible for submitting while they are on the committee, or do you use a subset for each review, eliminating those reviewers with a conflict of interest?
No, so in principle, all members of a committee review all applications to an individual opportunity. That said, we do have a 2-tier conflict of interest policy on the committees. So any member of a committee is welcome to submit an application to a specific opportunity, but in that case, they are recused entirely from participation in any aspect of that particular review. We also have a lower level or a 2nd-tier COI policy where, for example, if a member of the committee maybe had a prior mentee or a former collaborator who's submitting to a specific opportunity, in that case, the member can participate in the overall program review, but for that particular application, would only be asked to provide factual information that might inform the review.
Thank you. You actually answered a couple other questions in that answer, so thank you. We have a couple questions related to integration with other tools. We're not going to completely go away from reviewers, but I wanted to get to those. I think I'll answer those 2 for the people on the phone. So the first question is ask whether Pivot can be integrated with Asana. So we don't have that answer here for you. However, we're in constant communication with our partners at Pivot, so we'll make sure to share that information with them. And then the second question was, does Asana integrate with InfoReady Review? So not presently. We've had some internal conversations, but we would need to do some further investigation before being able to proceed with that and putting it on the product roadmap. However, this was not one of the questions, but I'll add this piece. Pivot does integrate with InfoReady Review. So if you have both tools on your campus and you would like them integrated, all you have to do is reach out to one of the 2 support teams there, either the Pivot support team or the InfoReady Review support team, and we could initiate the integration for you. It basically maps admin accounts between the 2 systems. You'll end up finding in Pivot is a button on screen that says push to InfoReady. And so clicking that button will automatically open a tab with InfoReady Review where all the details from the funding opportunity will populate into the competition. So I'll move on to the next question there. And this relates to number of applications submitted. How do you handle a single application to an opportunity, or a low number of applications to an opportunity that allows more? Does it still get reviewed?
It would be reviewed for, so if we have an opportunity where, for example, the institutional limit might be 1 and we only receive 1 application, that they are typically reviewed for basic eligibility based on what's been submitted. And if there are any questions, it will be flagged for further discussion, but otherwise it would simply be confirmed. If it were the only application by the stated deadline, it would be confirmed to move forward for that particular opportunity. For applications that are, for programs that are competitive at any level, so if we're allowed 1 and we receive 2 applications, those 2 applications would still be sent to a standing committee review and follow the typical committee review process.
Thank you. Here's a follow-up piece of information based off of the integration. One of the people that attended the webinar wanted us to share that Pivot also integrates with CalUse 424. So if you have both of those tools and want that integrated, you should reach out to your reps at those 2 companies to get the integration made there. That's crowdsourcing right there. So here's another submitted question. How does your office communicate opportunities to individual faculty members and build a strong pool of candidates?
I would say that is definitely one of the goals of trying to work as closely as possible with the different offices across campus. And they're both to make people aware, to try to provide as broad insight as possible into our upcoming limited submission calendar planning, because other offices are often aware of applicants to specific opportunities. And if they know about the internal deadlines, they can help us get word out. We also use Asana to make notes of, so if I'm contacted by faculty who might be in a particular opportunity next year, I'll typically make a note in our Asana task card to let them know individually. Beyond that, one of my colleagues does participate in our new faculty orientation every year. So when new faculty arrive on campus, I'm trying to make them aware as early as possible of the opportunity to opt in for the limited submission campus listservs. And beyond that, really just trying to share as broadly as possible the limited submission calendar so that we can rely on colleagues to help increase distribution and targeting.
Thank you. So here's a question. I'm quoting this one as well. Honestly, how hard is it to get reviewers? For my campus, it can be like herding feral cats. Are there any other real incentives for reviewers besides occasional lunch and implicit RTP benefits and service that you may have encountered in the past?
I will say I am extremely grateful for our practice of having standing committees because we don't make asks for service directly. It is done by our committee on committees. So I think there is implicitly a value on being asked to serve by our academic senate that I think is probably helpful in securing commitments. We also only ask for 1-year terms. And realistically, even the highest workload on our committees, it's maybe 6 to 8 meetings a year. And so I typically say that it's no more than 2 to 4 hours of work in a given month. One of the other things that I try to do is when we are successful in different opportunities, or if campus does receive particularly some of the prestigious national awards, I do try to relay that back to the committee members, because one thing we've heard is that people find it or can find it rewarding to both to be able to provide feedback, particularly to early career applicants, but then also to hear the outcomes of the different competitions.
Thanks, Lindsey. So here's another question about the review process. It's pretty straightforward. What is your standard review criteria?
As stated by the sponsor. So our committees within InfoReady and the instructions to reviewers will typically include a link to the sponsor's request for proposals or stated review criteria. And the internal reviewers are asked to bin or tier applications primarily on or solely on the basis of the sponsor's stated criteria.
Thank you. So changing gears here a little bit, what would you say are the important steps when initiating a competition for the first time through InfoReady?
In terms of launching, well, I guess I
think so. This is one of the questions we received during registration.
So typically, one of the first things I'll do is consult our records for either any prior occurrences of that particular competition or any similar competitions, and see if we have any process notes recorded, both on what materials we requested for the internal review and whether we wanted to make any changes or special handling for that particular opportunity. As I mentioned, kind of our approach is, if time allows, I almost always try to start with just a call for interest, so that people don't need to do any more work than might be required. Otherwise, the default is usually requesting a 1 to 3 page project summary, starting with the new competition. And then we work from one of our 2 templates, which has a few custom fields set up that we try to capture for every competition, just to provide immediate information for PIs who might be looking at the internal announcement.
Thank you. On a related note, this question relates to quick turnaround. What is the process when a faculty finds an opportunity with a very short turnaround time to submit?
We handle them on a case-by-case basis. Typically, one of the first steps is, well, reviewing our own records to see if we're aware of other interest. If it's not posted, typically no. But we also consult, that's a point where we consult with our colleagues in the Office of Contracts and Grants to see if they are aware of any other proposals that may have an internal proposal record within our submission development system. So they might be able to let us know about other interest, in which case we'll reach out directly. If time allows, we may open a very quick turnaround call for proposals on campus, and that would be in the interest of transparency. But there are also opportunities where we're trying to balance against the timeline for submission, the likelihood that there would be internal interest, and the value of providing certainty to the requesting PI to be able to move forward with either developing external collaborations or finalizing materials, requesting letters of support, that kind of thing. So there are occasions where after looking at all the factors, slots will be released on a first come or first requested, first allocated basis.
Thanks, Lindsey. Here's the question that actually everyone on the phone will really want to hear. Regarding the UC-wide research development listserv, do you ever allow non-UC institution RD staff to be on that listserv?
Not to my knowledge. The list is, so we do have our colleagues at UC Irvine, I believe, are coordinating. There is an annual multi-campus research development meeting that is actually going to be taking place over a day and a half in February. So it's used for coordinating that kind of activity, for distribution of funding opportunities that may be internal to the UC system, that kind of thing.
Thanks. And this is a question for me related to that. You mentioned that there's a Google group listserv. If anyone who's involved in research development online wanted to be involved in that, how could they be?
I believe that is currently managed by our colleagues at the University of Arizona as the group moderators. But if you wanted to send me an email after this, I can, or I can, Carlos, I can send you a link that might be to request access. I know it was previously distributed via the NORDIP listserv as well.
Okay. Thank you. So we're jumping around a little bit. This is end of the process. What does the final submission of applications to the sponsor, sorry, wrong W word. Who does the final submission of applications to the sponsor? Your office or Foundation Relations?
Almost never our office, meaning our office as research development. Our Office of Contract and Grant Administration serves as the authorized institutional submitter for external proposals. So all external submissions would go through their office, with the exception of some white papers and letters of intent. In those cases, Foundation Relations will occasionally facilitate submissions directly, but the majority of submissions will go through our Contract and Grant office.
Thanks, Lindsey. Now, here's a question that goes even further down the life cycle. How does your office obtain any sort of follow-up information related to who was selected and the outcomes of that?
In a few ways. Occasionally, we will pick up announcements from other areas of campus. Sometimes PIs will notify us directly. Sometimes our Office of Foundation Relations, or again, research development colleagues in other areas of campus will let us know. And sometimes we catch it in sponsor announcements.
Thanks, Lindsey. So here's a question about UC San Diego's use of InfoReady. Do you allow other departments on campus to manage competitions through InfoReady, i.e. graduate level competitions? If so, how do you manage sharing the license, use and fees with them?
So we did a 2-year, correct me, Carlos, it was a 2-year pilot, I think, that we did of InfoReady. And
it was a 2-year pilot.
Okay, great. So during that time, as part of our pilot, we actually opened InfoReady access to administrators across campus to help us assess how it might fit for other opportunities outside limited submissions. So we do have a number of, I think we might have all our administrator seats allocated right now or close to, but we're always happy to work with other departments on campus who might have a particular interest. Right now, we recently, after ongoing internal discussion, we recently established several initial microsites, expanding from our single portal to a couple different, one dedicated to limited submissions and one to other campus programs. Going forward, we do not have any set cost share mechanism and expect that if there were any internal cost share beyond sponsorship within our office, that it would probably be based on application volume and overall use by different departments, because limited submissions is still a significant part of our InfoReady portfolio, just due to the volume of competitions. But I can say InfoReady is currently being used. We do have a group who uses it for, we have groups who use it for student fellowship competitions, as well as student, I would say, more professional development programs.
Someone else that's on the webinar said, just typed in that they use InfoReady for seed grants for the UC San Diego Center for AIDS Research, acronym SDCFAR. So.
Yeah, and it's been really helpful to have different groups on campus using it, because it gives us an opportunity to hear some of the challenges that other people are running into, develop kind of tips and tricks for problems that we then run into in the limited submission review process as well.
And so on that topic, one question we have is, on campus, do you provide training and troubleshooting for InfoReady? And do you charge other units to use the license?
We handle it on a case-by-case basis. I also serve as the central point of contact for InfoReady on campus. So we'll work with anyone who may be thinking about using it. I think one of the helpful things is as we have applied it in different use cases, because there is a learning curve with any new software, as we use it for additional programs, it also has the effect of creating additional templates that can then possibly be shared by different groups. So I think, you know, the more we use it, the more templates we have, but also the more faculty who potentially become familiar with the system as reviewers. So maybe they've already reviewed for another program.
Thanks, Lindsay. So going back to a question about who has been selected, do you release the name of the person who is chosen by your review, or only after successful competition outside the institution?
Only after successful competition outside the institution. We don't, well, I should caveat this. We will share the name of selected nominees both with our contract and grant office and our foundation relations team, as well as my major proposal colleagues, so in order to provide resources and support for the selected nominees in developing their full proposal. We will not release the name of the nominee to other applicants within that same competition. That is only released in the cases of successful outside competition.
Thanks very much. Here's one more question about reviewers. What is I got to rephrase this. What's the feedback been from reviewers who are interacting with the system?
I think so. Our previous pre-fall 2017, our process had been coordinated by email. Because both a colleague and I work with our review committees, we typically so we have two people available to troubleshoot any concerns with the system, but we really haven't run into significant challenges. Because we release applications in batches once competition closes, an individual reviewer will typically receive a multi-review request email with links to the individual applications. I think the most common challenge we run into might be specific to our campus, and that is because we have single sign-on set up for our system, but we also have distributed email management across campuses, and we run into occasional issues with reviewers trying to sign in with email aliases. But in terms of actually submitting scores through the system, we found that it has been relatively straightforward. Although again, we do provide detailed introductions to InfoReady when new reviewers join committees.
Thanks for that comment. One thing I will add that there is a tool in place to address an institution's needs where there are multiple email aliases in place. If you have any questions about that, just let us know. We're getting near the end of our time. We have enough for one or two more questions. So here's one about you, Lindsey, and for you. Lindsey, do you spend 100% of your time on limited submissions work?
No. I am the primary point of contact for managing limited submissions on campus, but I do also manage intramural funding opportunities, as well as a couple seed funding programs on campus, and then serve as the campus point of contact for InfoReady. And formally, my role also includes funding consultations with both individual faculty and teams of faculty for targeted funding searches as well.
Thanks, Lindsey. And here's the last question we can get to. What method has been most effective for sharing funding opportunities with faculty and researchers?
Oh, I don't know if I can point to a single method on that. We do try to publicize the option to opt into campus mailing listservs and try to post that information, make that information available as broadly as possible. But I do think the more collaboratively that we can work with our colleagues across campus, so colleagues based in individual departments and schools, the more likely that we'll be able to get targeted announcements to faculty who may be of specific interest. In a campus with close to 3,000 PIs, it is very challenging to know who might be intending to apply to a specific program in a specific year. So although we'll make notes and follow up, I'll follow up directly with anybody that I might be aware of individually. I think our finding has been the more people who are aware and can help get the word out, the more successful we are in making sure people are aware internally.
Thanks, Lindsey. So we're at the end of our time today. And thank you for everyone for your time as well. Special thanks to you, Lindsey, for being a panelist and answering all the questions that were submitted. I'm sure everyone found those really helpful or helped reinforce that they're down the right path. Now, there were a couple questions that we weren't able to address, and we'll come back to those and follow up with the people who submitted those. Just a reminder that the webinar was recorded and an unedited version will be sent in email the next day or so. The edited version will be posted on our website the next week or so. Please feel free to share the recording with any interested colleagues who are unable to attend. And lastly, please fill out the post-webinar survey if you're able to. We always appreciate that. And thanks again for your time and have a great day. Bye, everyone.